From a brutal torture device especially made for women to tear their breasts off to other torture devices that will rip every one of your limbs off, we take a look at 13 of the most brutal torture techniques ever devised. Number 13. Rope torture. A rope is the easiest to use of all the torture equipment, since it is anything but difficult to find and can easily be fashioned to inflict a number of terrible retributions. For instance, it could be utilized to attach the victim to a tree, leaving the victim exposed with no chance to defend himself from animals or other people. It could be utilized to hang victims at the gallows for entertainment, while eventually inflicting death. And it could be fashioned to restrain the victim's appendages, while connecting the other end to horses, who might then be made to run, consequently severing the limbs. Number 12. The Judas Cradle. Closely identified with impalement, this frightful punishment involved having the victim sit on the pyramid-shaped cradle, after which they would be forced down on it by ropes with the purpose of stretching the victim's orifice over a long period of time, gradually impaling them. To add to the general embarrassment, the victim was usually naked and the device was seldom washed. So, if the torture did not kill you, the disease contracted from it would. Number 11. Spanish Donkey. Like the Judas Cradle, however much more awful, Spanish Donkey was mostly utilized by the Spanish Inquisition amid the late Middle Ages. It was a sharply angled wooden device of triangular shape, pointing upward, mounted on horse leg-like support poles. The stripped victim was then made to sit on the main board as though riding a horse, and different weights were joined to his or her feet to increase the agony and prevent the victim from falling off. According to historical sources, the wedge occasionally sliced entirely through the victim as a result of too much weight being attached to his or her feet. Number 10. Breast Ripper. A torture device designed especially for use on women, the breast ripper was one of the most brutal torture methods in the whole Middle Ages. It was normally utilized as a punitive or interrogational device on female criminals of adultery, self-induced abortion, blasphemy, heresy, or witchcraft. The intensely hot claws were put on the victim's uncovered breasts, with the spikes penetrating them, achieving a powerful grasp. The ripper was then pulled away, tearing and shredding the breasts. Victims were typically scarred forever, as their breasts were normally torn apart. Due to heavy blood loss or infection, death often followed. Number 9. The Tub. Known as the discipline of sitting in the tub, the sentenced individual would be put in a wooden tub with just their head standing out. After that, the executioner would paint their faces with milk and honey, and soon flies would start to feast upon them. The victim was also fed regularly and would end up swimming in their excrement. After a few days, maggots and worms would devour their body as they decayed alive. Number 8. Iron Maiden. This torture device, comprised of an iron cabinet with a hinged front and spike-covered inside, sufficiently adequate to encase a human being. Once inside its cone-shaped casing, the victim would be unable to move due to the great number of steel spikes impaling them from every direction. The interrogator would shout questions at the victim while jabbing them with the jagged edges. Number 7. Rat torture. Being in an enclosure with rats is torture enough, but, apparently, this is not enough for medieval times. One of the most sadistic of all torture techniques involved having a cage with one open side strapped against the victim's body. It would then be filled with large rodents and a heating element, which would be placed on the other side of the cage. The rodents' natural instinct led them to flee the intense heat. In order to escape, they would burrow through the victim's body with fatal results. Number 6. Heretic's Fork. This torture device comprised of a metal piece with two opposed bi-pronged forks joined to a belt or strap. One end of the device was pushed under the jaw, the other to the sternum, and the strap was utilized to secure the victim's neck to the apparatus, while the victim hung from the ceiling or was somehow suspended so that they could not sleep. If their heads dropped, the prongs would pierce their throat and chest. Number 5. The Head Crusher. The head crusher was a merciless torture device regularly utilized just by the Spanish Inquisition. The individual's jaw was placed over the bottom bar and the head under an upper metal cap. The executioner then gradually turned the screw, gradually compacting the head between the bar and cap. At first, the teeth were smashed and disintegrated into the jaw, and then the eyes followed. Some variants of the head crusher even included a small container that received the eyeballs squeezed out of the person's eye sockets. The agony could last hours until the victim's brain was finally crushed. Number 4. Thumb Screw. The thumb screw was a standout amongst the most predominant interrogatory torture devices of medieval Europe. It was a basic vice, with its crushing bars often lined with sharp metal teeth. It was used to slowly crush the victim's thumb or other fingers. The crushing of the fingers was achieved by turning the handle on the top, slowly pushing its toothed crushing bars together. This torture method was primarily used to get confessions from the detainees, as it was to a great degree extremely agonizing. Number 3. The Rack. Intended to dislocate each joint of the victim's body, it was believed to be the most agonizing type of medieval torture. This torture device was made out of a wooden casing with 2 ropes fixed to the base and the other 2 tied into the handle on top. Once the victim was bound and set on top of the rack, the torturer would start to turn the handle. Eventually, the victim would be stretched till his appendages were disjointed. The torturers, however, would keep on turning the wheel until the appendages were totally detached from the victim's body. Number 2. The Chair of Torture. Also known as the Judas Chair, it was a horrible, intimidating torture device that was added to dungeons in the medieval times. Utilized until the 1800s in Europe, this chair was layered with 500 to 1,500 spikes on every surface with tight straps to restrain its victim. Made of iron, it can also contain spaces for heating elements beneath the seat. It was often used to scare people into giving confessions as they watched others being tortured on the device. Number 1. Crocodile Shears. The crocodile shears were a torture instrument utilized in late medieval Europe and normally reserved for men who attempted to kill the king. These shears were made of metal, based on the concept of pincers. The insides of their hemi-cylindrical blades were lined with a great amount of spikes. In the wake of being heated to an excruciatingly hot temperature, the crocodile shears were connected to the victim's erect penis, which was then torn from his body, or, in the event that he was fortunate, the device could just lead to intense bleeding from the severed arteries. Sounds like a device from hell, if there is one.